begin the current Daf in Mesech Sukkah, Daf Tezvav. We begin on the bottom, we begin on the top of the Amid, where we continue with the theme of the previous Mishnah regarding Gezeres Tikra, regarding using boards as schach for the Sukkah. Joining us for today's Daf. Some things we can discuss in today's Daf are the use of boards as schach, the halacha of using invalid schach together with valid schach. Some of the key terms and concepts we discuss in today's Daf are Tasa v'lemin ha'asur, is the halacha that when you have to make something, it can't be made invalid and then indirectly made valid. You have to do it initially in the appropriate way. And in our context, it's related to the halachas of schach. Gezeres kalim is the decree that if we let you use certain things as schach, you might come to think that since it has utility like a kli, you might actually be able to use an actual kli, which a kli is makabel tumah, and therefore obviously you cannot use it, and if it can be used, that other thing, which really should be allowed to be used. Paretz kaimed is the halacha that if you have breached area that's equal to the closed off area, there's a machlekes if that's considered closed or open, which obviously relates to the halachas of mechitzas. So we begin the current daf. We begin Tezvav Men Aleph on the top of the Amid, where we continue with the next Mishnah. And it's a little bit of a cheshbon today's daf, but it's going to relate back an explanation to the previous daf, which we had a machlekes amaron, how to explain machlekes hanoim in regards to the Gezeres Tikra that we had in the previous Mishnah. So the Mishnah begins Tikra, regarding a roof. Now Rashi explains generally a roof, we're talking about boards that are 4 tefachim wide. So if you have this roof, she'ein alel maziv, which does not have plaster on it, Rabbi Shloimy explain exactly why does that not have to have plaster, but it's something that's movable, that you could go ahead and manipulate it. So Yehuda Eimer, he said that it's a machlekes b'sham misil, what the halacha is when you have this house, basically, that you want to use for a sukkah. You have all these, you have a regular roof with these boards. What could you do to make it a sukkah? So b'sham they say if you want to sit beneath, inside that oil for the purposes of sukkah, so there's 2 things you have to do. Mifakvik, you have to shake and undo the boards of the roof, and then then you take, as the picture illustrates, in between each one, so like the arrows are showing that you shake the boards, and then additionally you take between every board you take a board away and you put schach in its place. Gemara later on is going to explain why do you need to do both. He says you have to shake the boards, and in between every board you have to take away a board and put kosher schach in there in the middle. That's Beisham. Bisilam, they say no, either one or the other, either mefakfik. Now, why would you be shaking the schach? So that's because of Tasa v'lemin ha'asur. What happens is that this was not made to be a sukkah, this was made to be a house. You can't sleep, you can't sit, you can't be yotze in a house on sukkahs. So you shake it, and you're making it now for the purposes of being a sukkah, but you don't have to put schach instead of the boards. Now, as Rashi explains, this is Rabbi Yehuda, Lishitasa, according to his opinion, mentioned the previous Mishnah. He says that boards are 4 tefachim wide, are valid to use to cover the whole sukkah with that schach, which that is the way Rav explained Rabbi Yehuda in the previous Mishnah. Rav had explained that the machlekes Rabbi Yehuda and Reb Meir was regarding boards that are even 4 tefachim wide. Even 4 tefachim wide boards, which Rashi explained that a regular roof has 4 tefachim wide boards. Even there, yeah, you could cover your whole sukkah with 4 tefachim wide boards. So a regular roof, which people had asked after the shiur, says, okay, what's the difference between the regular roof? Then yeah, you're right, you could use a regular roof. It's just the problem is, you have to make it for the purpose of being a sukkah. So you have to lift up each board, and that would make it l'shem a sukkah. Now, Shmuel, however, is difficult, and the Gemara is going to have to explain Shmuel very differently towards the end of the Gemara. But that's Beis Hill, that either you're mefakfik, that you shake each board, or another option is noifel achas meben time. What you do is that you don't have to shake any of the boards. You just remove between every other board, you take it away, and you put schach in the place, because the way Rashi explains it, is that's considered an asiyah. Meaning, the problem is, Tasa v'lemin ha'asur, by removing each and every other board, that's now making it for the purposes of being a sukkah, and therefore that's going to be not a problem about Tasa v'lemin ha'asur. A third opinion, Meir, that was Rabbi Yehuda explaining a machlekes b'sham misil. Reb Meir, he says, no, you have to take every other board away and put in schach, and you don't do pikbuk, you don't shake the boards, which as Rashi explains, What he means to say is that shaking the boards is not going to help. Because Reb Meir goes according to his opinion that mentioned in the previous mission, that holds a mesachim in the sun. It's a board that's 4 tefachim wide, which is what these boards of the roof are, is like schach pasul. So it's not going to help to shake it, because even if you shake it, it's like taking metal poles and shaking it. It's not going to help. It's schach pasul. But when you take away every other board and you put schach kasher, that's going to be valid. Which Rashi's bothered, but what Rav Shmuel who says on Daf Yomi in the base, but schach is pasul even 4 tefachim in the middle of the sukkah. How does it help to remove every other board? What do you mean? Every board is schach pasul because it's 4 tefachim wide, and it actually invalidates the sukkah. So why does it help to put in kosher schach? So that's like we had explained in the previous daf. Rashi had explained, as we'll see later on a later daf, that if you do board schach, and you start both sides board, you're going to end up at one place, as this picture does not illustrate. You're going to end up, if you have a sukkah that's exactly 8 amas, you're going to say doifen akuma up until the 2 middle schachs that meet, and you're going to have 8 tefachim of schach, which that's the kosher sukkah. So if you have over here, let's say, imagine this right over here was 8 tefachim of schach, because if you do board schach and you're coming from the other side board schach, you can each space is 4 tefachim. You can end up with 8 tefachim in the middle, because they're joining over there, and you're going to say that everything up until that is doifen akuma, because it's an 8 amas sukkah, and you could say doifen akuma up until dalet amas. So since you're going to end up in the middle with 8 tefachim of schach, that's the minimum size sukkah, which is 7 tefachim, and it's not like you have schach pasul separated, because you're not considering it as schach, you consider it as doifen, as part of the wall.
You can't use the whole sukkah.
Right, only up until the middle. Or another approach is that he would hold like Rav, who says later on that schach pasul, even not just on the side, but even in the middle, is only a problem with arba amas. That's how Reb Meir would hold. So therefore, the fact that you have the boards in the middle, it's not a problem, because you don't have 4 amas of schach pasul contiguous. You don't have it continuous. So that if you have a board 4 tefachim, it's not a problem, because schach pasul placed on the emsa, according to one opinion, that if Rav later on is actually with dalet amas, not dalet tefachim. So it wouldn't be considered invalidating the whole sukkah. Maybe you wouldn't be able to sit on it, but it wouldn't invalidate the sukkah, and if you wouldn't have to say doifen akuma, you wouldn't have to say that whole svara. You could even say that it would be kosher. So those are the 3 different opinions. You have Rabbi Yehuda, which is according to Shammai, that says you have to do both, seemingly at least. You have to loosen the boards and you have to remove every other one. You have Basil that says no, either one or the other, either loosen or remove. And you have Rabbi Meir that says no, you could only remove, and it doesn't help to loosen, like we said, because he holds that you cannot make schach with the board, so just loosening is not going to help. It's not kosher schach. That was the mission. So now there are 2 possible halachic problems that we're going to be discussing to explain the halacha of the Mishnah. We have tasab l'min asik, which is this was a regular house. You had a house covered with boards, and it's not valid because it wasn't made for the purpose of a sukkah. So let's say lifting of the boards would make it mina'as, would try to make it. It's not indirectly that you're trying to make it right now. And then also another problem is there's tikra, which is the problem about boards itself. You have a roof. These are boards, and boards could be confused with the house. And if we said you can never have boards of a certain size, so that's what the Gemara says right now. What's the reasoning of their opinion? Again, Basil said you could do either one or the other, either loosen or remove. So we understand, because their reason of what we're discussing over here in the Mishnah, we're trying to ameliorate and take care of, is the problem about that you have to make something, and it can't be made indirectly with something that was already done invalidly. So here also, since this roof was made for a house and not for a sukkah, because it doesn't have the title of sukkah on it, so that's the element we're trying to affect, because as Rashi points out, Gizer's Tikra, they don't hold of when you do it with boards, even if it's 4 tefachim wide boards, they don't hold of the problem of, that's how Rabbi Yehuda said in the previous Mishnah, which was obviously Rabbi Yehuda in the opinion of Basil, they don't hold of the problem of Gizer's Tikra. So good, if the only problem you're discussing is Tasha L'Min Aslik, so if you shake the boards, you did an action, now you're doing it explicitly for the schach. And if you do the one of taking out one in between, you're also doing an action of making it specifically for a sukkah. So I understand Basil's opinion, you can do one or the other. And the Beishamai, but according to Beishamai, that they said you need to do both, you need to shake the boards and you need to go ahead and remove every other schach. I don't understand. Says the Gemara, my time, what's their reasoning? If their reason is because that it can't be indirectly made, it has to be made explicitly for the purpose of Sukkah, so b'chabesagi. So what do you mean? It's sufficient with either one of them is going to be considered as an asiyah, even just, let's say, just shaking the boards would make it into asiyah. And imishum gezeres tikra, if they're concerned because of the gezer of a roof, of the boards, that you're not allowed to make schach with boards, and therefore it doesn't help by just shaking the schach, because that's not going to help the way Rameir said, because you can't keep the boards. They're like schach puzzle, because they're 4 tzvachim wide. So then then it should be enough just by taking out every other board and putting kosher schach, which that's going to make it that you don't have tikra anymore. And it's also going to be an asiyah too. So why do you need to have both? Besides removing, why do you also have to loosen the boards? What's the purpose of doing both?
Why aren't you going to have zastik? You said 4.
Right, so that's like we said by Remeir, either because that I'm saying you're not going to have zastik, you're going to have the pestle in the middle, you're going to have the schach, the kosher schach in the middle, you'll have Tefan Akuma, or it's only a problem when it's a schach puzzle of Dalad Ames. But the point is, but you're taking care of the problem on Gzeis Tikra when you're putting in the kosher schach. So why do you also have to then loosen the boards? So the Gemara says, La'olam, truthfully, Mishum Gzeis Tikra. Really what Beisham is concerned for is, they're concerned about the boards. Because you can't have 4 tefachim boards, because we're concerned that you might think that you could sit in the house too. But Hachikam, and this is what Beisham is saying. They're saying, you're right, they're not really saying you need to do both. You don't do pick, poke, and removing. They're saying, even if you're going to shake the boards, it's still not going to be enough. If you take away every other board in, then yes. But if not. In other words, they're saying the pick is not going to be effective. You have to remove the one in between, where that A does both. It does Tasav Levin also because you're doing an actual Maisa, making it into a Sukkah right now, and it also takes care of the problem about Gezeres Tikra, because now you don't have the whole thing covered with boards of Dal Tvachim. You have the kosher schach to make it into a kosher Sukkah. Now, this that they said, Beisham is in the Fakvik, again, it means the same Fakvik is not going to be effective, rather you have to take one in between. So the Gemara says, wait a second, if that's the case, look at the end of the Mishnah. That was Rabbi Yehuda in Beishami and Beisil. So we said we understand Beisil. We said we didn't understand Beishami, you need to do both. We said, Beishami doesn't really mean you need to do both, saying even though you do pickbook, it's not enough, you still have to do Nitlas and Azmar time. But then look at the next in the Mishnah, he says, Nitlas and time, if you take away every other one, that's what you have to do. But it's not going to be enough by shaking the boards. If that's the way you explain Beishamai, Remeir, Haina Beishamai. They're saying the same thing. Saying pickbook is not effective, it's not enough to shake it, because this Gezeres Tikra can't have the boards of 4. I don't care if you shake it all day. You can't have boards of 4 Tvachim wide, you have to take away and put in kosher schach. So then it's the same as Beishamai. So the Gemara says, you're right, but Hachi Kamar, this is what Remei was telling to Rabbi Yehuda. Essentially what Remei was saying was that there is no dispute Bisham Basil. You were quoting Rabbi Yehuda, Machlekes Bisham Basil, in what you do regarding over here the roof. Remei says Basil holds like me that you cannot make schach with boards, and it doesn't help to do pickbook. So you're right. What Rabbi Yehuda was saying in Beis Shammai is the same thing Remei was saying, but that's only because Remei was saying that Beis Hill also agrees to that. So Remei was saying his opinion. Essentially, was saying there is no machlekes Beis Shammai Beis Hill. What you, Rabbi Yehuda, are quoting in Beis Shammai is what I say is what Beis Hill also agrees to. So everyone agrees that pickbook doesn't help, and you have to do Neitel Achas B'Benatayim, and that was Remei's response to that of Rabbi Yehuda.
What's machlekes with my opinion?
The machlekes of Rabbi Yehuda is there an opinion that holds that you could use boards of 4 Tvachim wide? That's what we have in the previous Mishnah. Which our Gemara is going to get into that right now, that Rabbi Yehuda holds there's no Gezeres Tikra, and Remei, and it's a little complicated because we have machlekes of Aram how to qualify that. We'll get to that at the end of the discussion. But just to simplify, Remei had said, and that's what the Gemara's going to question is, Remei holds the Gezeres Tikra, says you can't use boards of 4 Tvachim wide. It doesn't hold the Gezeres Tikra, says you could use boards of 4 Tvachim wide. In our Mishnah, we see that it's actually a machlekes Rabbi Yehuda who says there's no Gezeres Tikra, was actually saying it in machlekes B'Sham Beis Hill. Beis Hill holds there's no problem with Gezeres Tikra. Beis Shammai holds there is a problem with Gezeres Tikra. And Remei is saying, no, Rabbi Yehuda, it's not a machlekes. No one holds. Everyone holds that the Gezeres Tikra, no one holds going to be kosher. Even Beis Hill holds pickbook is not going to be enough. You have to be Noit Avos Memei time. Because no one holds you could use boards of 4 Tvachim wide. So that's what I said. It's a little cheshbon when I said starting off the daf that we had said a machlokes Rabbi Yehuda from the previous daf. In our Mishnah, we see that it's actually a little bit more complex. That what Rabbi Yehuda was quoting in the previous Mishnah, that is no problem by Gezeres Tikra, was not according to everyone. That was according to Beis Hillel of this Mishnah, that he was saying that this is Beis Hillel. And on that is what Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Meir is telling to Rabbi Yehuda, it's not true. That's what the Gemara is saying. What is it? Isn't he saying the same thing? But he's trying to tell him that everyone agrees to that. Beis Hillel does not disagree. Beis Hillel agrees also pickbook would not be enough. And that was the words of Rabbi Meir in the Mishnah. It's not going to be enough to do that of pickbook. But that's what the Gemara asked, as was just brought up right now. The Gemara says, "My kamashmala." So I don't understand. What is the chiddush that Rabbi Yehuda Anasi, who's saying our anonymous Mishnah, what's he coming to explain with this dispute of Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda to say here? Well, obviously, it's that Rabbi Meir is existing. Rabbi Meir holds that there's a problem about using a roof, meaning you can't use boards of 4 tvachim wide, so it's not going to help to do pickbook to just shake it because it's not kosher schach. You would have to remove pieces of the schach, meaning of the boards, and put in kosher schach. Rabbi Yehuda, less like Gzeres Tikra, Rabbi Yehuda that way, but does not hold the Gzeru of the boards, and that's why he says in Beis Hillel that it's enough to be mafakvik, just shake the boards, it's okay, I don't care if it's 4 tvachim wide. It's not a problem, we're not concerned that you're going to confuse it with a house. But the legal b'chadazim, we already had this machlokes once before, did not within our previous Mishnah. The previous Mishnah had said, Mesachah ben Nesam de Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says you could go ahead and make a covering of the sukkah with boards. Rabbi Meir, this is a problem. So this is the redundant Mishnah that we had in the previous Mishnah. So on that, Amr B'chia, Barabba Amr B'ichan, he says that actually, Reisha, the beginning of the Mishnah, meaning the first Mishnah, our prior Mishnah, is actually not the way we explained it up until now. It's not that the machlekes was regarding Gezeres Tikra, that if we let you use boards of 4 tvachim wide, then you might come to use a roof of a house. No. It's actually Benesarim. We're talking about boards that are not 4 tvachim wide, but meshupin, but they're smooth, and they're fit to be used for utility. That's what askinan. That's what we were speaking about in the previous Mishnah. And you know what the concern of their machlekes was? It's actually because of a concern of vessels. There was the discussion to invalidate, according to Rabbi Meir, because although it pshutikli eitz, although boards are smooth wooden vessels, and hence they're not makabel tumum, because to be makabel tumum you have to have a concave, you have to have a receptacle. So essentially, a flat board, as we had said in the previous daf, is valid. It's gedulei karka, grows from the ground, and it's not makabel tumah. Yeah, but Rabbi Meir held that if we let you use a board that has utility, you might confuse it with a kli that also has utility, which is makabel tumah. So Rabbi Meir said, no, we're not going to let you use boards, even if it's not 4 tvachim wide, simply because it has tashmish, it has utility, and you might confuse it with a kli, which also has utility, which is makabel tumah. And therefore, that was the machlekes. In contrast to our Mishnah, the machlekes has nothing to do with because you might come to use a kli, it's because you might come to use a roof. You might come to use a house. And you might say, I want to go into a sukkah for. It's the same thing as my house. I have couches in my sukkah, I have everything in my sukkah, I just sit in my house. Same boards. Okay, that's the machlekes. Maybe we're not going to let you have such wide boards because it looks just like a roof. You got to have some good bamboo, the thin little sticks. That looks very different. That looks like a nice temporary sukkah. But it's not the same thing. The prior Mishnah is Gezeres Kalim. This Mishnah is Gezeres Tikra. So it's not redundant. By both. One for Kalim and one for a roof. The problem is, says the Gemara, but Rabbi Yehuda Amar Rav. The Amar, this Amar was quoted enough in Beis and Beis. He said, Sicha b'chitzim. He said, if let's say you covered a sukkah with the arrow shafts, which are the sticks that the arrow part goes into, the metal part goes into. So he said, Tzcharm ksher. He said, if it's the male ones, what does that mean? It means it has a protrusion that goes into the pointy part of the arrow. So they said ksher, then it's going to be kosher because it doesn't have a receptacle. The nekev is psula, but if it's the female one, which means it has a concave, it has a hole in it, so then it's going to be invalid. And says the Gemara, the nekev, as we see, Rabbi Yehuda Rav holds, we're not going to tell you can't use the male arrow shafts because of the female arrow shafts, even though the female one is makabel tumah, but we're not concerned to let you use the zcharim ones. So then if that's the case, hachanam le'nix in the summer shubin not the kalim. according to Rabbi Yehuda Rab's logic, then here also we shouldn't tell you that from the previous Mishnah. You're telling me, you explained the previous Mishnah of smoothed out boards that, even though it's not Makabal Tumah, not going to let you use as schach, because you might come to use a kli that is Makabal Tumah. But we see obviously he doesn't hold to that Svar of Rabbi Rab, because he says you could use the male arrow shaft, which obviously that's more confusing than the case of boards with Caleb. The male arrow shaft is very similar, just that one has a protrusion and one has a hole. And that's the difference between those two different arrows. Ella al Karchach, obviously as Gemara, you can't say that the Reisha, meaning our previous mission, was machlekes regarding Gzeres Caleb, because Rabbi Rab does not hold Gzeres Caleb. So obviously according to Rabbi Rab, Reisha pligi with Gzeres Tikra. The prior Mishnah obviously was a machlekes, as we had been explaining up until now, regarding Gzeira about if we let you use boards, you might come to use a roof. And the Sefer pligi with Gzeres Tikra, that means the Sefer is also machlekes regarding Gzeres Tikra. So then we're back to the question, the pligi b'tadizim the lovely, why do I need to have the same machlekes in two Mishnayos, one after the other? So the Gemara says, Seifa, meaning our Mishnah, the Chiddush is like this. You're right, it really is redundant, but not. It's essentially, the Mishnah is repeated because Rabbi Yehuda, he deka Amar Leila Meir. It's really Rabbi Yehuda who's telling Rabbi Meir, Amai cross out in the sum, why in the previous Mishnah did you say that you cannot use Succah boards, Mishum Gzeres Tikra, because of a concern that, we might use a regular roof of a house? Hi Svara said, that logic that you're telling me is Rabbi Shloimy this Lahu. Rabbi Shloimy held to that Svara. But still, Lagazer still does not have such a decree. So you're right, our Mishnah is repetitive because it's part of the discussion, it's part of the conversation that you're was saying, I hear your Svara, but that's Rabbi Shloimy, it's not Bezil. That's when Meir responded back, no, they're not disagreeing, because Beisil agrees to Beis Shammai in my svara that there is Gzeres Tikra, and therefore that's the redundancy of our Mishnah. It's really essentially part of the conversation. And then the Gemara continues and says, wait a second, this discussion is not over yet, because it's a little bit more complicated. This whole discussion we had up until now, I understand according to Rav, that he said, if you recall from the previous daf, he had qualified Machlekes Yehuda and Meir that we're talking about boards that are 4 tvachim wide. The Yomei is the Gzeres Tikra. Yomei holds Bechlal of the Gzeres Tikra, and therefore when it's 4 tvachim wide, it holds it invalid. Rabbi Yehuda, less the Gzeres Tikra. Rabbi Yehuda, even if it's 4 tvachim wide, he didn't hold of the Gzeres Tikra. Oh, so why does that make sense? Because Rabbi Yehuda is saying in our Mishnah that we have a Tikra. What's a Tikra? Rashi explained Tikra are Nesarim Sheyesh Ben Dalid. A regular roof is made with boards that are 4 tvachim wide. That's why we have the Gzeres Tikra. Because if we let you use these boards, we might think that you might come to use a regular roof. So it makes sense, according to Rav, that in our Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda says, according to Beis Hillel, that all you have to do is pickpoke, all you have to do is shake the boards, because even though they're 4 tvachim wide boards, we don't hold of Gzeres Tikra, so it's enough to shake the boards. But El Shmuel, this whole Mishnah doesn't make sense. El Shmuel, the says B'Shem Ben Arba Machlekes. He had said in the previous Mishnah, the whole Machlekes was only regarding boards and not 4 tvachim wide. Where Meir still chayshlam. You do some people do make their roofs with 3 tvachim wide boards. Okay, you does not. So that's their Machlekes. Aviyesh Ben Abba, but Shmuel explained that if it's 4 tvachim wide boards, everyone's going to agree of Gzeres Tikra, that's going to be possible. So I don't understand. So Seifa, meaning our Mishnah, which considered the Seifa in the previous Mishnah, but my pliki, what are they disagreeing about? Most definitely a regular roof, a tikra, is 4 tvachim wide. How could Rabbi Yehuda be saying according to Beis Hillel it's going to be kosher? By just shaking the boards? Okay, it's not going to be tazal b'milaseh. What does that help? You have 4 tvachim wide boards, which you say is schach pasel. How is Rabbi Yehuda saying in your Beis Hillel that all you do is mefakvik, and that you don't have to be notlachas b'benetayim? So the Gemara comes up with a whole different explanation, according to Shmuel, how to explain our Mishnah. Says the Gemara, "Bebitule tikra kamefleki." What does this mean? So, like this, Shmuel would tell you that you're right. In general, if you have a board that's 4 tvachim wide, and there was no roof here originally, meaning right now you're coming to make the schach of a sukkah, you're right. Even Rabbi Yehuda would hold that it's going to be puzzle if it's 4 tvachim wide, because he does agree to the gezerah of a tikra, that we don't want you to come and sit underneath the boards of your house, and you can say, what's the difference, this or a new one? It's all the same thing. That's the original gezerah's tikra, which we had discussed in the previous Mishnah, which, according to Shmuel, Rabbi Yehuda agrees to that Gzeres Tikra. His whole saying that it's not a problem is only if it's less than 412. But 412 would be a problem. So how do you understand our Mishnah? It says over here, this was a house. This was a roof. And now he's coming to do an action to make it into a sukkah. This proves that he knows that the Torah says, that you can't just have it as a roof. You have to undo it and change it. Oh, so that's where Maflik is Yehuda and Reb Meir, if you're still going to have the Gzeres Tikra or not. Why? So it says the Gemara like this. Marsa, Rabbi Yehuda held that Batla B'hachi. Yehuda held that, let's say according to Beis Shammai, it's not going to be a roof anymore if you take away one of every other board and you put in kosher schach. Now, meaning, even though he's proving that he knows that it's a problem of tasavul and asli, even just by pickbook, by just shaking the boards, Beis Shammai says it's still not enough. We're still concerned, even though you realize you're undoing tasavul and asli, you're fixing that problem because you're shaking each one like you're making it right now. But we're still concerned if we let you keep the boards at 4 tefachim wide, you might think you could still sit in the house. But, and this is the main point, but Beis Hillel held that no. Since you're showing that you know that the roof, that as it was up until now, was a problem, how do we know that? Because you're shaking the boards? And that's to ameliorate the problem of tasavul and asli. So we're not concerned anymore that you're going to sit in the house. Because you know a house is not good. The whole idea of Gzeres Tikra is, we let these boards up for a while, the guy's going to say, look, sukkah house, sukkah house. The same thing. What's the point of sitting in the sukkah? Let me go into the house. But this guy knows he can't go into the house. He's shaking the boards. What are you shaking the boards? Because you know a house is not good. And you know that this was a house up until now, and that's a problem with tasavul and asli. Oh, so therefore that's why, according to Rabbi Yehuda, although in general he holds a 4 tefachim wide board is the problem, that's when you're coming to make it right now. But if it was a house and now you're undoing it, be too late tikra? No, then even 4 tefachim wide, not a problem. According to Rabbi Yehuda in Beis Hillel. Whereas when Marsa Meir held, no, b'hachi lebatla. No, Meir held that when he said that no, even over here, Beis Hillel would agree that we would be geyser that Gzeres Tikra, and pickbook would not be enough, and therefore Meir said that Noitel Achaz Ben the time in Mefakvik is not enough to do pickbook. You have to go ahead. It's not enough. You would have to go ahead and remove every other one because we're still concerned. If you're having a board that's 4 tefachim wide, you might come to confuse it with a house. That is the explanation of our Mishnah according to Shmuel in the way to resolve it, how he understood that Rabbi Yehuda agrees to Gzeres Tikra of Dal Tzvachim. How in our Mishnah does he say it's not a problem? Because it was a roof and you're undoing it, and there Rabbi Yehuda would say then, according to Basil, that you wouldn't have Gzeres Tikra because you're being mevatlet. Obviously, you know you can't sit in the house, and therefore we have no reason to make Gzeres Tikra. Continue now look at the next Mishnah. Continue on this regarding kosher and unkosher schach. It says in Mishnah, Makada Sukkah. If someone is roofing his sukkah, I mean like we do, that first you go ahead and you make poles on the roof, and then you put the kosher schach on top of it. So if let's say you do it with spits. Oy baruch a spit is like you make the shish kebab on. A stick, put out the spit. So if let's say you made it with spits, oy baruch amito, let's say the size of a bed. Shemar is going to explain that it's mekabel tama, and how is it mekabel tama? But therefore, obviously, it's schach pasul. So it says the Mishnah, if you have enough space, these are the spits. If you have enough space between those, every spit, along the entire surface of the sukkah, which you could put the kosher schach, which we always call pesel, because like pesel is going to be yekir. And so it's on the whole sukkah, then sure, it's going to be kosher. Which Gemara is going to ask, but you don't have more kosher schach than pesel schach. It seems to be that it's going to be the same amount. But that's going to be kosher. Another halacha, hachaited begadish, if someone digs out from a haystack, lasses like sukkah, which if you dig out the middle of the haystack, you're left with the sukkah like an igloo all around. So in the sukkah, that's not going to be as a valid sukkah, which we discussed in the previous daf. That's a tasavul and asli. That's going to be indirectly making the sukkah. Now it says the Gemara, so leima to have it to give to the Daf Yomi shiur. Our Mishnah, like we said, sounds like even if it's parutz ka'imid, where you have the breached area, like the closed area, you have the kosher and the non-kosher, sounds like that's equal amount. Now the thing is that the Idna, we learned that we have a machlekes, paretz kaimin. If you have the breached area, the open area, like as much as the closed area, which this was said in the context of mechitzas of Shabbos. If you have a partition, a wall, that was made with boards that are 3 tefachim wide, and between every single board of 3 tefachim, you left a gap of 3 tefachim. Now the reason why that's significant of 3 tefachim is because if the gaps were less than 3 tefachim, then even if it would be a lot of them, it would still be love. Love would be that it's like closed. And therefore that's why the brisker, when he ate his soup with the fork, he said, yeah, but it's loved. It's less than 3 tefachim, and it's like closed. But the thing is when it's 3 tefachim, then you don't have that, and so it's at least a gap of 3 tefachim. Now the thing is, you have the whole area enclosed like that, which is known as paretz kaimin. You have the closed area as the amount of the open area. So essentially, our Mishnah is the same thing, because our Mishnah has the puzzle as much as the kosher. So it's the same equivalent of paretz kaimin. Kosher is the equal as the non-kosher. So Reb Papa Mamute says, okay, that's permitted. And Rabbi Yeshua Amar says, no, it's a problem. So we seem to be contradicting Rabbi Yeshua from our Mishnah. Because our Mishnah is saying it's kosher when it's paretz kaimin. So that's not like Rabbi Yeshua. So on that Rabbi Yeshua, it says, no, my kamaisan, what does our Mishnah mean when it says that you leave the space between them? Kamaisan, it means benichnis v'yaitze. It means to say that the kosher schach, that's in the area between, could easily be taken in and out from between them. So that means to say the kosher schach that you put over there is more than these spits. And because the airspace is more, because if you want to be able to easily take it in and out, it's got to be a little bit more than the amount of the actual non-kosher schach. And if it's going to be not a paretz kaimin, it's going to be oimin merubal paretz. It's going to be, well, that's the halal, that's the terminology used for the Shabbos. It would be more kosher than non-kosher. Now, in Tamid Beis, the Gemara says, but what do you mean? The Gemara assumes, like Rashi explains, that this that the Gemara was answering that it's nichnas v'yetze, it's the amount that it could easily be taken in and out. What the Gemara is essentially saying is it's always nichnas v'yetze, meaning we're presuming that it's nichnas v'yetze because we can't be so precise and make it exacting that it's not any more, any less. So therefore we're saying, if you have spits and you have the amount of space in between, it must be that you're going to have a margin of error that's going to make it that it must be nichnas v'yetze. That's what the Gemara is saying and asking, wait a minute, if a person puts his mind to it, he could be precise and still saying kamaisan if it's going to be kosher, so then it is paretz kaimin. So then it is difficult to Rabbi Yeshua. So on that, remember, he says you're right, but we're talking about b'madif, we're talking about specifically where the Mishnah is not talking about where a person did it precise. We're talking about where he was generous with the gaps in between, with the space between the spits. And when we say in the Mishnah kamaisan, we mean nichnas v'yaytzer, we mean the amount that it can be easily taken in and out. So then again, we're having more kosher schach than the pasal schach. Or Rav Amma, he says another approach. He says no, even if you did precise, you didn't leave the gaps for the kosher schach to be more than the non-kosher schach. But the case is in Hoyin Nesunim, if the spits were placed, chassis were placed in the length, so then Noitznan, he put the reeds of the kosher schach, arif, he put it in the horizontal, meaning that obviously that if you wouldn't put the tops of the kosher schach on the spits, if you're doing chassis, so you're doing one way, the vertical of the sukkah is the non-kosher schach, and then you're doing horizontal of the kosher schach, you have to say that the kosher schach was on top of the spits because or else it would fall down to the ground. And that's the point of the spits, is to support the kosher schach. So obviously the kosher schach has to be more than the pasal schach, because not only is it taking up the gaps, it's also on top of the non-kosher schach. So obviously it's taking up more area on the roof. So therefore it's going to be mavatal, the non-kosher schach. If it was, let's say, the same length as the same direction as the non-kosher schach, so that would be, you could say, okay, they're exactly the same amount. Because whatever's hanging over is not counted, or it's the same amount. Whatever's inside is the same amount. Here, if it's going crisscross, it has to be more, because not only is it covering the gaps, which is the same amount as where the non-kosher is, it's also on top of the non-kosher, because that's where it's hanging on to. It's not holding on to the walls. It's holding on to the non-kosher schach, and therefore it's going to be kosher. It's not the same amount. It's more than, according to Rabbi Yeshua. So to have already nice and chesty, let's say you put the non-kosher schach, you put it horizontal, then you're going to put the kosher schach vertical, but be that as it may, it's going to be going over the non-kosher schach, and therefore you're going to be having more kosher schach than unkosher schach. The next halacha of the Mishnah, we had said, if let's say someone goes and roofs the sukkah with spits, oi baruch samita, or with the bedposts, which are pasla schach, so that's what the Mishnah was saying. Okay, as long as you have the gap in between to be the same amount, then it's going to be kosher, which we had explained doesn't necessarily mean the same amount. It's got to be nechnas v'yaitzer. Fine. But one thing says the Gemara, it sounds like that the bedposts are pasla schach. Says Gemara, let's support the Bamba Tabumi. Because the Amr Ami Bar Tabumi says Schacha bevloi kelim. If someone goes and he makes schach from worn out garments or vessels, Psula, it's going to be pasul as schach, which Gemara later on is going to explain that we're talking about garments or rags that don't even have 3x3 finger breadth. Where even though right now it's not makabel tumah, but since it comes from a kli, the Rabban Geyser that is mipasul v'schach. Oh, so the bedposts also are not makabel tumah right now because, like this picture illustrates, it's deconstructed. It's not fit for anything. It's only the bedpost. Oh, so but why is it considered as not valid for schach? Because it came from a kli, came from a complete bed. So even though right now it's not a davar makabel tumah, but since it came from it, it's going to be pasul. That's like the halacha of Rabbi Shloimy that he said the bevloi bugadim. Although right now it's not a bag, it's not makabel tumah, it's not even 3x3 finger, but it's a minimum amount to have something makabel tumah. But it came from that. It came from a davar makabel tumah. Therefore, it's ended up to be used as schach. This halacha of arucha samita of the bedpost, which is also not a klik, it's a broken part of the bed. You found it on the street corner when everyone's throwing out their garbage, and you brought it home. You thought you could use something of it, so your wife said throw it out because we don't need other people's garbage. But it's going to be pasul because it came from something that was makabel tumah. Says the Gemara, no. The Gemara says not necessarily a raya, because you could say because Amar Reb Chana Amar Rebbe, where he explained the Mishnah Masechtas Kalim. Ba'arucha, when we're talking about the bedpost, v'shtei kra'ayim, and it has two of the legs with it, or b'ktsara, we're talking about when you have the bedpost, you have, as this picture of the bed shows, you could have this is generally the narrower end, this is called the ktsara, and this is the arucha. The longer part of the bed is where the length of the person's body goes. So, as we'll explain shortly what he was going on, but he said you could be talking about the arucha, the long part of the side of the bed with two legs, or b'ktsara with the narrow part, and also or b'shtei and shtei krem and two legs. So Chanami here also we could be talking about barucha b'shtei krem, and not just talking about the side of the bed. We're talking about the long side of the bed b'shtei krem and two legs with it. The Gemara later is going to explain what do you mean, what utility does that have? The Gemara is obviously trying to answer. Then no, we're not saying like the halacha of Rabbi Ami Bar Tabumi that it's not a kli right now, but since it came from a kli, therefore it's going to be pasul for schach. No, we're talking about that right now. It's fit to be used as a kli. It's not a right Rabbi Ami Bar Tabumi's halacha. Could be the side post is just a side post, and it is going to be a kli because it has two legs with it, and therefore it's considered kli right now. And that's what pasul for sukkah. And b'ktsara, and we could talk about the narrow end, that which is by the width of the bed, by the head of the bed and by the leg of the bed. And we're talking about with the two legs. That's the case in the Mishnah, that's what you made for schach, and that would be something that in itself is a kli to be pasul for schach because you makabel tumah. That's the case of the Mishnah. It's not a right to Rabbi Tabimi. So says the Gemara, where is this halacha of Rabbi Rebbe that you're quoting him and saying that it's not just a bedpost that has the two legs with it, and therefore it's a kli on its own right? It's not. It's going in the following Mishnah Masechtas Kalim as a continuum of design and al. The Mishnah brings mita. If you have a bed that the Tanakhama says mitamas chavila, a bed only contracts tumah as a bundle, meaning when it's together. Umataras chavila, so too, if it was tamei, you could only taivel a bed to purify it. You can't do it limb by limb. You can't do it part by part. You have to first fix the bed, and then you can taivel it. It could only become tamei and become tar as a full bed. That's the real answer. They disagree. They say no, a bed can become tummy in parts, and it can also become tar in parts. Now the question on that of avarim, of parts, was mainiu. What do we mean when we say parts? That was where the teaching of Rabbi Shloimy Schwartzberg, he was saying, he says, arucha b'shtei krayim. We're talking about the long side of the bed with the two legs, and katzar b'shtei krayim, and the narrow part of the bed with the two legs. That's what it means to say avarim. It doesn't have to be the whole bed. It can even be parts of the bed. Now the question is, l'may chassid. So what's the utility that you're saying you don't need the whole bed? You're saying that for it to be clean to mekabel tumah or to be mitar from tumah, you the chachamim say it's even avarim. And what do you mean by avarim? You mean the long side of the bed with the legs, or the narrow side of the bed with the legs? How could that be a kli? Who do you know that sleeps on a half of a bed? How could that be useful? How could that be a kli? Oh, says the Gemara, I'll tell you how. You have to be a little bit creative. Lemismechinu aguda. What you do is you lean it against the wall, along, depending on which part of the bed was broken. You lean it against the if let's say it's the side post of the bed that you have. You have the long side, arucha, and you have the two legs, and you have the mattress, you have the bed, but you're missing the other side, the other long side. So what you do is you lean it against the wall on its length, ulemesa malayu, and you sit on it, umishti ashli. What you do is you put ropes and you weave it, and now it's fit to lay on it, and it's going to have tumas medrash, because what you're going to do is you're going to, like this picture of the bed. So let's say you have only the long part. Let's say you have the arucha samit, you have the long part with two legs. So let's say you're missing these two over here. So good, lean it against the wall and rope it to that wall. So you could have missing two legs just by leaning against the wall. So you don't need the legs, or let's say you only had the katsara. So you would lean it then the long way against the wall, and you would rope the bed to the wall, and just having two legs would be sufficient. Oh, so it's fit to lay on it. So it would have tumas medrash. And therefore it is considered kli to mekabel tumah just by having the arucha samita, and that's why it's going to be possible to be used as schach, because it is useful as its own right. So it's not a raya again to the halacha of Daf Yomi that since it came from a kli. No, it is a kli itself. How? It's a broken bed. Yeah, but be creative. You can lean it against the wall, even if you have only one half of it, again, depending if it's on the length or on the width, and then you'll be able to use the bed in that way. Now, Gufa, the Gemara just concludes by going back to the teaching that we had thought that our Mishnah supports, which we had said doesn't necessarily support. I'm going to bound by Daf Yomi. It says, if you go and use schach, but with worn out vessels, so psula, it's going to be possible to be used as schach. So the Gemara says, my beloy kelim, what's worn out garments? So Amabai says, matlonis, we're talking about shmatas. We're talking about garments that are worn out. It doesn't even have 3x3 finger press. Which, for the halachas of Tumah, we say it has to be at least shalosh al shalosh. It doesn't even have shalosh al shalosh. There's not for wealthy, not even for poor people. So it's not a kli, and still it's not going to be kosher for schach, because it came from a beged. It came from Tumas Mekabel Tumah. That was the halacha that we wanted to say. I supported from the halacha of our Mishnah Aruchas Amita, which we said no, because the Aruchas Amita said is a kli itself, as we had explained. But it says we have a brayse that supports Rabban Bar Daf Yomi. The brayse says machzela shel shifa v'shel gem. If you have a mat made of sedge or rushes, these types of reeds, so shireha, it's remnants. I mean, let's say it got diminished and there's something left over it. Even if, let's say, it got diminished from its measurement, which would be its minimum measurement of being mekabel tumah, which a Mishnah teacher says with Caleb, that a mapitz, a reed mat, has to be at least 6x6 tfachim, mekabel tumah, and it's less than that, still emes achamba. You cannot use that mat for a schach. Why? Exactly, because since it originally came from a kli, which originally was mekabel tumah, by a zav or a nida laying on it, so even now, even though it's less than 6x6 and it's not mekabel tumah, you still cannot use it in schach because it came from something that was mekabel tumah. Now, machzelas hakonim, a mat of reeds, in contrast to the previous one of gemi, if it's a large mat actually you could use as schach. The reason for that is, as Rashi explains, because it's not a kli, because generally the large mats of reeds they would use for schach. But a small one which people would lay on, then you cannot use for schach. Rabbi Shloimy says no, even the large reed mat is mekabel tumah, because Rashi explains he holds that no, even the large reed mats people do use to lay on, and therefore it is a kli that's mekabel tumah. And therefore, you cannot use it for schach. Again, that's a secondary halacha once we brought in the brisa. But one thing is that we see that Rabbi Amr Bar Tabyumi's halacha is supported from a brisa. We said it's not necessarily supported from our Mishnah, because our Mishnah we could say aruchas amito is not that something that came from a kli. It itself is a kli, even when it's a half of a bed, because you could support it against the wall. But this brisa definitely does support him, where it's saying that if you have these shmatzes that are less than 3 by 3 tefachim, that's the halacha of Rabbi Amr Bar Tabyumi, that's going to be valid. That's a part of the brisa that says you have the leftovers of these gemi mats, which even though it's less than a shiur, you cannot do from schach because it came from a kli that wasn't a kabbalah. Don't think it any time.